He was a sadistic murderer.
He was called the Hangman of Riga.
My God, this is a Nazi criminal. What is he doing here? This is something that the state of Israel could not tolerate.
The plan is like the best spy novel.
Gather all possible intelligence about him, befriend him, and kill him.
Summer 1964, Brazil. Latvian Nazi Herberts Cukurs is living quietly in Sao Paulo. For the man known as the Hangman of Riga, it is a peaceful life, but all that is about to change.
Cukurs was photographed in Brazil by someone from the Jewish population. They have heard of him, and they know who he is. Cukurs was involved in some of the most vile crimes of the Second World War.
Cukurs, together with the Latvian Nazis, killed thousands of innocent people, children and elder people and women.
And there's a lot of testimony, which I've read in archives from after the war, in which Cukurs, the name keeps coming up.
The photos of Cukurs travel halfway around the world to a special Nazi hunting unit within Israel's Secret Service. They kick off one of the most daring missions in the Mossad's history.
September 1st, 1964, a Mossad agent is called to a meeting in an operational apartment in Paris. His commander tells him, "We have a very special mission for you. We want to send you to South America to find for us a Nazi called Cukurs." He tells him, "Your name from today onward is Anton Künzle."
He told me that Cukurs was living in Brazil.
Cukurs was an officer in the Latvian Air Force before the war.
Mid-1941, Hitler invades Latvia. Then Cukurs joins up with a gang of murderers and cutthroats. They went around following Nazi orders to go and commit atrocities on the Jews in Riga, capital of Latvia.
They saw him personally snatching babies from the arms of the mothers and killing them. They burned the synagogue with 300 people in it and didn't let anybody run out.
He told me that Cukurs was responsible for the extermination of 30,000 Latvian Jews. Thinking of my parents, who both died in the Holocaust, I agreed immediately.
Anton Künzle was the perfect choice for this kind of operation. First of all, because of his background. Künzle grew up in Germany when the Nazis came to power. German was his mother tongue. He was part of the team that kidnapped Eichmann 4 years earlier.
Unlike a desk murderer such as Adolf Eichmann, Cukurs literally had blood on his hands. And they think, what are we going to do? Are we going to do another Eichmann? Are we going to kidnap him? Conduct a trial? Or are we going to do something quite different?
They decided this time not to kidnap him and not to put him on trial, but to execute him and have the public reaction to it.
The plan: Künzle will befriend Cukurs and lure him out of Brazil. Assassinating him on Brazilian soil is risky. There could be retaliation against the large Jewish population. If Künzle is caught, he could be executed.
We called him the deceased from the beginning. We were confident the mission will succeed.
They wanted to make Nazis all over the world fear of their life.
Despite the danger, the Mossad agent has one condition.
I asked to go only alone. No squad to watch about me. If it was discovered that somebody was guarding me, it might be my end.
But to work alone, he needs a cover story.
I became an Austrian businessman, Anton Künzle, who was a former Nazi, who intended to develop tourism to Brazil. I started growing a mustache. I went to a tailor and ordered a summer black suit. At the oculist, I faked the result of my examination so that I could get prescription glasses. If my glasses would have been fake, Cukurs might have suspicions.
Künzle looks like your classic, anonymous, Western European guy. He's sort of balding, he's got a moustache, he's got glasses, he's a little bit tubby. If you walk past him in the street, you wouldn't remember him. And he's the perfect spy.
My bald head and my belly are the means which make me trusted to everybody I meet.
He gets a new passport, and then he goes around Europe creating this completely new identity.
He printed business cards. He ordered special and expensive stationery.
He relied on that absence of global communication to get every piece of paperwork he needed. Everything is like something out of a real vintage thriller.
Armed with a new identity, the Mossad spy begins the next phase of his assignment, the hunt for the Hangman of Riga.
I booked a ticket to Rio de Janeiro. I intended first to stop at Rio de Janeiro to know what Brazil is like, and then to advance to Sao Paulo, close to the objective.
He toured around a couple of days to establish his cover story, tried to build up some contact to the local tourist industry.
I told them that they were interested in investments, and they gave me recommendations to São Paulo. I got their personal cards, names and their addresses. I left signs in every corner to assure my identity.
When Anton Künzle was given the mission of finding Cukurs, he really felt that he's doing a holy mission. His mother was killed in Auschwitz. His father died in concentration camp of Theresienstadt.
I feel a certain debt to my parents.
But the mission isn't just about revenge. Many European countries are about to formally declare that the time for prosecuting Nazi war crimes is over. Israel will never accept this.
Even though 20 years have passed, some people don't forget.
After a week in Rio, Künzle moves to Sao Paulo and his target, Herberts Cukurs.
I went to the place where Cukurs was. I saw him.
Cukurs at the time was renting boats, and also he was running a plane service.
He flew little seaplanes, and he would give people tours of Sao Paulo.
Cukurs is living in Brazil for the last 20 years.
Like many high-ranking Nazis, after the war, Cukurs escaped to Brazil. The Brazilian government is fanatically anti-communist and turns a blind eye. Künzle knows if he is caught, they will be far less sympathetic to an Israeli spy.
Künzle understood that this is something never done before in the Mossad, because he was sent to Brazil without a backup team. And he was working solo, by himself, in order to approach Cukurs, gain his confidence, and eventually bring his death.
He seemed very strong, quite physically fit. I would have to take this into account. I decided to return when I was sure I was ready.
"48 hours after sighting his target, Agent Kunzel returns to the marina, this time to meet with Herberts Cukurs.
I decided to hire him for sightseeing flight over Sao Paulo.
Cukurs is a very good pilot. In the 30s, he was a national hero in Latvia because he built an airplane, flew from Riga to Gambia in West Africa. Non-stop flight.
Cukurs was indeed the Latvian Limburg, the most famous man of daring do in Latvia and that part of the world at the time.
After the flight, the Latvian Nazi invites the Israeli spy for a drink.
He took us to his captain's cabin. I saw a gunner on his boat. I got tense because for Cukurs there was no problem to murder.
Anton Künzler started telling Cukurs that he's a businessman, showing him he has money, he has connections.
Cukurs sees Kunzel's obviously a man seemingly of great wealth. Cukurs, on the other hand, has made very, very little money running his flying boat hire pleasure flight business. But he lived extremely modestly and he had financially a very, very tough time.
I told him that I had come to invest capital in South America and tourist business. You are connected to it. It would interest me to talk to you.
And that's his way of tugging at Cukurs' greed. Cukurs admits quite quickly to Kunzel that he has this incredibly dark past.
He said, you know, they say I am a war criminal.
His remark that I'm a Nazi criminal could be a way of testing to see who is the guy in front of him. And Künzler showed no, he didn't react, you know. He said, okay, so people say you are a Nazi criminal, I mean, okay. He asked Künzler, what were you doing during the war?
I knew he was a captain. In this case, I decided I was a little lower, so I made myself a lieutenant.
And he said, and I also was wounded on the Eastern Front. And Cukurs said, really?
I opened my shirt where I had an operation in Tel Aviv hospital, and I said I got wounded on the Russian front.
He had some sort of mole or something removed. And of course he claimed this was some sort of wound that he had received. And of course all this helped build up the story that he had indeed been a serving officer of the fatherland. And Cukurs started to believe it all.
He said, you know, why don't you come to see me during the week in my home? I said, I don't know when I shall come back.
Kunzel knows in order to get his man, he doesn't want to, like the suitor at a disco, go in straight away and lay his intentions straight up. So he plays the long game.
I wanted to let him boil in his oil. Not so quick. Chi va piano, a volva lontano, va sano. Who goes slow, goes far, and goes safe.
Künzler went back to the hotel and he sent a message back to headquarters in Tel Aviv.
It was in secret ink.
The message said, the fish has swallowed the bait.
I left him in doubt, and after a week or so, came back.
Cukurs invites Kinzler to have dinner with his family. He lived in a house which looked like a fortress. It's a fortified house with barbed wires around and dogs and searchlights. It was defined enough to show him, look, I'm well protected. It's really going into the lion's lair. No backup team, no protection. If the family is suspicious that he's maybe a Mossad agent, they can kill him, throw away his body, nobody will know about it.
I meet his wife, his son.
Cukurs shows him his medals from the war. He showed him his collection of guns, handguns, a Mauser, a Beretta, you know, different calibers.
I thought it might be a warning.
He thought, I like you, but be sure to know that I know how to protect myself.
Cukurs wants to always make out that he's the big man. And at the same time as Kunzel's trying to subtly impress Cukurs, Cukurs is not so subtle in the way he tries to impress Kunzel. So he tries to make out, I'd be a good business partner for you, and he claims he has this plantation outside town.
He took me close to the jungle.
It's quite a long drive. And obviously, you know, people will need a little rest break. Kunzel suddenly realizes, because he's circumcised, this could be a problem if Cukurs sees this when they urinate on the side of the road. Kunzel was very cunning about it, and he worked out that if Cukurs actually had seen his penis and inquired as to why it lacked a foreskin, he was going to say, well, I caught gonorrhea in a military brothel on the Russian front, and one of the forms of treatment was to be circumcised.
At the plantation, the stakes are suddenly raised.
Cukurs says, hey, I want to have a little shooting match, a little competition with you.
He had a sporting rifle with him. I thought it might be my end.
Could Cukurs have been more cunning than him? Could he have lured him up to the banana plantation to kill him? So they set up a target. Cukurs shoots first. And he gets a very nice grouping. And Kunzel goes, well, it's the type of practice Cukurs got from shooting Jews running away from him on the streets of Riga. Kunzel then is given the rifle.
And said, do you still know how to shoot? I said, yes.
Cukurs didn't know that Anton was a real marksman.
I was the first in Israel to volunteer for the British Army.
Kunzler made 5 or 6 beautiful shots.
He shoots within a 3-centimeter grouping. It's like that classic moment between two men and one has got the better one than the other.
So he said, you're all right.
Cukurs admits that Kunzel is the better shot. It's a key moment in the hunt. And it occurs to Kunzel, well, I could just do the job now.
I shoot Cukurs, hide his body. Mission accomplished. Nobody will know.
I decided not to execute it. I was afraid I might be discovered.
In Brazil at the time, there was still capital punishment. Imagine to yourself a Jewish Mossad agent being hanged because he was trying to execute a Nazi.
Cukurs suddenly accepts that Kunzel probably is what he says he is.
He started to call him Herr Anton in order to say, I understand you are the boss. Psychologically, it strengthened Cukurs' confidence.
Over the following weeks, the Israeli spy gets closer to the marked man.
He takes him for a round of nightlife, you know, glamour.
He notices Cukurs is very in control. He nurses his drinks, and he's very nervous about those around him. And at one point, he even suspects one of the waiters, I think, of being Jewish, and thinks that maybe this guy is following him.
He was very, very wary of anybody trying to approach him because he knew, of course, that Eichmann was kidnapped by the Mossad. And at the time, there were stories that the Mossad is hunting Nazis all over the world.
Cukurs is borderline paranoid.
Anton Künzle continued all the time slowly to implant the seeds of trust in Cukurs' mind. A sentence here, a sentence there about his financial abilities and his companies.
The moment I am in action, I am very cool. I was confident. Cukurs trusted me.
He keeps feeding Cukurs little tidbits that maybe we'll set up some company here to do this. Maybe you could get involved, Herbert, me old friend. But Künzle can tell that there is that suspicion there. So he's very careful not to promise him too much.
And Cukurs is getting greedier and greedier.
The ka-ching sound is going in his head. He's thinking there's some cash here.
Maybe this Mr. Künzle is his way out of lower income class to the world that Cukurs believes he should belong to, like his heydays in the Second World War.
On the first day of the occupation, I was 16 years old. And there was a knock at the door, and there was Herberts Cukurs. And they said, "You're a Jew, you get outside, doesn't matter what you were." That's the last time I saw her dad. And that was the beginning of the end. Cukurs came in and threw us out of my apartment. He took all our belongings. They built a ghetto in the outskirts of town. Bob wired it, called the Riga ghetto, where they shoved us into the ghetto, and I kissed my mom goodbye for the last time. The next morning, they were gone.
The Jews were driven out of the ghetto at Riga by Cukurs and his men through the forest, where tens of thousands of people were murdered. 3 people survived, and luckily we have the testimony of some of those. He wouldn't just shoot adults, he would shoot children in front of their parents. And there are testimonies which has him shooting a baby in front of its mother.
Within 4 months, I lost my mother and father. My entire family was wiped out. They were killed in the mass graves. You could hear screaming and hollering. The children were hollering, the women were crying. We could actually hear the guns. Later on, Cukurs occupied my apartment. And at nighttime, he would have me come upstairs to my own apartment and play the piano while he was entertaining his girlfriends. I could hear Cukurs laughing and drinking and having fun, and there I am sitting and playing. It was horrible. Even though I survived, it's something I can never get over.
The Israeli spy spends more and more time with the Latvian Nazi. They scout for new investments. They plan future businesses.
Künzle realizes after many more meetings with Cukurs that things are going extremely well. And he realizes that things are now getting into place in order to actually perform the final part of the mission, i.e. the execution.
3 weeks after their first meeting, Künzle tells Cukurs he has to return to Europe to take care of business.
I said, I shall send you a telegram, and I left for Europe. I left him hoping he would be again a rich and important person.
But when Anton Künzle returns to South America, he will not be alone. In Europe, Anton Künzle plans the next phase of his operation against Nazi Herberts Cukurs.
Künzle goes back to Paris where he discusses with his fellow agents what's the best place to kill him.
We decided that if we shall execute him, it would not be in Brazil, but in Uruguay.
There's a big, big Jewish community in Brazil. And if this is seen as Jews killing a Nazi, then there's going to be a backlash against the Jewish population.
Uruguay was more democratic than Brazil at the time. A very small Jewish minority. It wouldn't cause such a repercussion. And also important, no capital punishment.
Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, they decide that's the best place.
They decide to lure him into an isolated place. Someone from the team would read to him a charge that he was personally responsible for the murder of 30,000 Jews of Riga and execute him on the spot.
He's a very, very big, solid guy. And you see pictures of him, and he's got forearms the size of, a boxer's. He's a fearsome proposition.
They were expecting to have some kind of a fight. A hit team is built up. Our 4 Mossad people, they are given course in man-to-man combat.
They spend a lot of time practicing their karate moves and how to do their martial arts.
The hit squad is primed. The balding spy sends the Hangman of Riga a letter urging him to come to Montevideo. As an incentive, he includes a check for plane tickets and expenses.
Kunzel decides, I can say that we have a business opportunity we want to explore there. We're a big business, we can do this. Cukurs is reluctant because he's very worried about leaving the country. He feels threatened, he feels unsafe because he won't have the protection of his friends and family around. He was always suspicious.
But for the impoverished Nazi, the money proves irresistible.
Cukurs had no passport, so he had to file for a Brazilian passport. And Künstler helps him with background letters and documents saying that he's employing him as his associate.
A week later, Cukurs sends a telegram to Kunzel, confirming he'll meet him in Montevideo. The trap is set.
The team of Mossad agents fly out, and they fly into different places at different times, but they all meet in Montevideo in order to plan the next part of this mission. And it was very hard for the agents to find the property they needed in which they could kill him. But eventually they found up this little suburban area, part of Montevideo, what seemed like the perfect property. It was a one-story house. In the neighbouring property, there were builders working. Murdering people can tend to make quite a lot of noise, and clearly having a load of builders next door was not going to be helpful. But time was tight, so they thought it'll just have to do.
All that's missing is the target. To ensure Cukurs doesn't back out, Kunzel decides to meet him in Sao Paulo and travel with him to Montevideo.
And at Sao Paulo, he steps off the plane, and there's Cukurs, ready to greet him. Cukurs has a Super 8 camera, and he's filming him.
When I stepped down from the plane, he stood in front of me and took my picture. I tried to cover my face.
And Kunzel, of course, is absolutely appalled by this because, like any good spy, he doesn't want to be photographed. He then says to Cukurs, "Hello, Herbert. Have you got all your papers to go to Uruguay?" Cukurs goes, "No, I haven't got them yet. Haven't sort of got round to it."
I sharply spoke to him and said, if you want business with me, never do this again. Never send me a telegram you are ready and you're not ready.
Kunzel decides, I need to behave like this man's boss. And it's a great bit of bluff because it works completely.
I went on, I say, you send me a telegram to Montevideo, to my hotel. In the meantime, that you prepare visas.
Cukurs eventually gets the paperwork sorted out.
Cukurs gets his passport and then he can fly to Montevideo to meet his good business associate, Mr. Anton Künstler.
Before he leaves, Cukurs does something odd. He gives his wife the Super 8 film he took of Kunzel at the airport.
Was it because he just wanted, to have some footage of a short, balding, moustached man? No. Cukurs had this cunning. He was always suspicious of Kunzel.
Cukurs told his wife, if anything happens to me, this is the man who is responsible.
Five months after the Mossad mission was launched, the Latvian Nazi sends word he's flying to Montevideo. He meets the Israeli assassin at his hotel.
They check into the very expensive hotel, which is also part of the plan, to calm down Cukurs, to show him that everything is going according to plan. From the beginning, Cukurs had a dual feeling towards Kunzel. On one hand, he saw it as a chancy encounter with an Austrian ex-officer in the Wehrmacht who is a businessman and is promising all kind of good things for the future. On the other hand, Cukurs was a very clever person. He was alert all the time. He knew that after the war, he will have to pay for his crimes. He knew that he is not innocent. He was very suspicious.
Cukurs is still greedy for money, and even though he's got suspicions about Kunzel, he's going to go along with it because he's desperate for the cash. So he says to Cukurs, look, I really need your advice to help me find a new sort of business premises, a satellite office. So could you help me come and have a look round a few potential buildings we could use as offices? So the two men do a lot of driving around in a VW Beetle, looking at various premises. It's a way of trying to make Cukurs just feel a bit more relaxed.
After going around Montevideo for a while, Anton Kunzel tells Cukurs, I want to show you another place. This is his last ride to the villa where they're going to execute him. Anton Kunzel needed to signal the team that everything is going according to plan.
I left the car without enough petrol. I stopped at a certain petrol station.
Another member of the team is waiting on the other side of the road. He signaled him that everything is okay.
The lookout alerts the hit squad to meet at the house.
They took off their clothes because they were expecting to have some kind of a fight. They knew it will not pass without violent reaction from Cukurs. Things could be very messy and very bloody. Kunzel walks first, to show that he's the boss.
If I open the door and say, go in, he will not. If I go in, he will come after me.
And he's thinking, I can't hear him behind me. Is he going to follow me? Is he suspicious? Is this the moment where suddenly Cukurs runs up to me and just hits me in the back of the head and that's me gone? And eventually he hears footsteps. And Cukurs is walking up behind him and he thinks it's going to happen.
He opens the door, walks in.
And suddenly the agents jump on it. Cukurs is fighting for his life.
He managed to rush through the door.
And the most horrendous fight takes place.
One jumped him and immediately threw him down.
He fought like a lion.
All these young Mossad agents were all being, held off by Cukurs.
Cukurs reached to his own gun.
A hammer is produced. Cukurs pretty much crumples, but he's not dead.
He started shouting, "Lasst mich sprechen. Let me speak."
And 2 shots are fired into his head. And that was the end of Herbert Cukurs. Agents in underpants, covered in blood, looking down at the hangman of Riga. He was gone.
The plan to incapacitate Cukurs and read aloud the judgment against him was abandoned in the struggle.
They had prepared in advance a huge trunk.
He was put in the box.
They attach a note to his blood-stained body saying, "Considering the gravity of the crimes of which Herbert Cukurs is accused, notably his personal responsibility in the murder of 30,000 men, women, and children, and considering the terrible cruelty shown by Herbert Cukurs, is carried out his crimes, we condemn the said Cukurs to death." He was executed on 23rd February 1965 by those who will never forget. He dressed up, and each one went his own way according to plan.
And then they all make their way back to Paris. The job is done.
Back in Paris, the Mossad team needs to get word out that Herbert Cukurs has been executed.
We contacted paper agencies in Uruguay to tell them that the body of this gruesome murderer will be found in a house in Montevideo.
He called a newspaper in Paraguay. The telephone call to the agency was received by a junior editor, never paid any attention to it. And the people in the Mossad are waiting 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Nothing happens.
No one believes that this has happened. And in the meantime, Cukurs' family are starting to get a little bit worried about what's happened to their loved one.
This is the first time Herbert Cukurs' son has spoken on television.
For the first few days, we thought everything was normal. Then, after a few days, that's when we began to worry.
So then somebody called up another agency in Montevideo and gave them full details. And this time, one of the editors decided this is serious enough and he called the police.
12 days after the execution, Montevideo police find the maggot-ridden body in the trunk inside the house on Cartagena Street.
The policeman opened the trunk and there was Cukurs' body. It had bloated. It was an absolutely vile thing to look at.
A thumbprint from the body matches the print on Cukurs' passport. As intended, the news travels like wildfire.
I was listening to the radio and heard they found a body in Uruguay. I caught this terrible feeling.
A wave of anti-Semitism breaks out.
Synagogues were burnt down in both Uruguay and in Sao Paulo. There were lots of random acts of low-level violence, but there wasn't any sort of massive reprisal carried out.
It seems Israel's message is heard loud and clear. 4 days after the body is found, the German government reacts. They extend the deadline on prosecuting Nazi war criminals. But in Montevideo, police have a homicide to solve.
The family showed pictures of Kunzel to the world's media.
We gave them the picture that was taken at the airport. It was all we had.
But it was too late. Interpol were called in to try and find out who this Anton Kunzel was. But of course, he retreated back to the anonymity of being a Mossad agent in some town in the middle of Israel.
The case goes cold. It would be 20 years before the Mossad admits responsibility for assassinating Herbert Cukurs.
I was very proud of the Israelis for doing that. Even though it was horrible, I thought he deserved it. You must always remember, we must never forget.
Despite testimony from witnesses like Sasha Semenov, Herberts Cukurs' family denies he committed atrocities against Latvian Jews.
We have been waiting 60 years for some kind of proof against my father. If the world can't show any documents that prove his guilt, then declare him innocent. My family has been suffering their entire life because of these lies.
To this day, the man responsible for Herbert Cukurs' death has never revealed his true identity.
Anton Künzle came back to Israel. Of course, his mustache was shaven off, glasses thrown away. He continued to work for many years in the Mossad.
They got their man, they did it efficiently. Morally, it's problematic, but it is nevertheless brilliantly done. So it was, in many ways, the perfect mission.
I am very satisfied. It was never dull in a moment.
He was a symbol of the Holocaust.
The methodical killer, the Nazi Holocaust monster.
He is directly culpable for the murder of 6 million Jews.
Mossad receives this information that Adolf Eichmann is living in Buenos Aires.
We were sure that this man was Eichmann.
The Mossad agents were running a terrible personal risk in going on this operation.
The order was very simple: to capture him, to bring him to Israel alive.
April 1960, Argentina. One of the world's most notorious Nazi war criminals, Adolf Eichmann, is living incognito with his family near Buenos Aires.
The family have in fact moved to a street on the outskirts of Buenos Aires called Garibaldi Street.
But a blind Jewish piano tuner whose daughter briefly dated Eichmann's son has tipped off Israel's secret service. Now, the man branded the architect of the final solution is in the Mossad's sights.
The information on the table was that he was in the Argentine on the name of Ricardo Clement, that he lives in San Fernando, a suburb of Buenos Aires, in an isolated house.
Why were we so skeptic? There was no electricity, no water, no nothing. We asked ourselves why a man like Eichmann goes to a dump like that.
The Mossad agents thought there's no way that Eichmann, a lieutenant colonel in the SS, the murderer of 6 million of our people, lives in this very, very modest little bungalow. It's impossible.
We are sure that we got the wrong person. It's not Eichmann. It's the wrong man.
Mossad spy Zvi Aharoni is sent to Argentina to investigate. He enlists a local volunteer to help.
So Aharoni goes to rather extraordinary steps with one of his people going up to the house, speaking to him about trying to buy land in the adjoining district.
We had a camera hidden in a case so you can't see it.
You would press certain buttons on the handle and it would click these photographs.
You can make pictures and the man doesn't know that you've been photographed. And that's how we got these pictures.
He gets the pictures of the man he thinks to be Eichmann. He looks at it, compares it to old portraits of Eichmann.
The left ear is like a fingerprint. They photographed this man with his left ear. And we had a photograph of Eichmann in SS uniform with his left ear.
We were almost sure, I can't say 100%, that the man was Eichmann.
Aharoni returns to Israel and presents the evidence to Mossad chief Isser Harel. Harel takes it straight to the Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion.
Ben-Gurion recognizes an opportunity. But he's fearful that the Israeli youth will forget what happened to the Jews and that the world will forget what happened.
Ben-Gurion instructed Israel to bring to Israel Adolf Eichmann for a trial in Israel.
The plan is simple but daring. A team of secret agents will kidnap the war criminal and smuggle him 9,000 miles to Jerusalem. Harel enlists the one man with the skills and the nerve to run such an operation, Mossad commander Rafi Atan.
I decided how many people I need, okay? And I started to choose the people.
Rafi Eitan puts together this team that is kind of the standard of what you see in spy movies or spy novels. Each individual on the team was picked for his or her expertise, whether it was as a forger or as a master of disguise, or whether it's someone who was excellent at logistics. There are no James Bonds, debonair men in flashy suits. They are ordinary individuals who you would never pick out in a crowd, and that's what made them so good.
For the agents, the mission is personal. Adolf Eichmann is the man who made the Nazis' death trains run on time. He's the man who helped to send millions of Jews from all over occupied Europe to the gas chambers.
Eichmann is called the architect of the final solution, and he was very good at his job. A lot of these agents' parents would have been killed essentially at this man's hands. He was a very rabid, intense, fiercely efficient and virulent Nazi. Towards the end of the war, Eichmann tells a fellow Nazi that he will happily go to his grave knowing that he's killed 6 million Jews.
His role was to isolate the Jewish populations, bring them to ghettos, and ultimately ship them to extermination camps like Auschwitz. It was almost like he was operating this factory of death.
He was a specialist on Jews, and he knew quite a lot about them.
He was a desk guy, but he was also in the field. He would go and see the techniques that they were using, gas vans and just shooting Jews. He was out there seeing it.
He's an evil, murdering Nazi bastard. There's no doubt about it.
This was an extremely significant operation for the Mossad. This operation, if they're successful, will put the Mossad on the map.
It was an incredibly ballsy thing for the Israelis to decide, was to show the world that Israel couldn't be messed with. Wherever you are in the world, we will come and get you.
Two weeks after Adolf Eichmann was photographed, an advance team of Mossad agents arrives in Argentina on separate flights on different days.
We all traveled on false passports, on languages we didn't master, in countries we didn't know. And we had nobody to turn to.
The logistic people of the Mossad made our timetable, how to go to the Argentine, hotels to stay, what identification to use.
Their task: confirm the man in the photograph is still at the same address. Surveillance expert Abraham Ben-Dor heads to Garibaldi Street.
I wanted to see the area and the surroundings. Tzvi was driving, I sat near him. By chance, we came when the bus came. And suddenly I saw a man walking, and I said to Tzvi, "That's him in the photo. It's Eichmann, it's Eichmann." Tzvi got so excited that he slammed the brakes. It was a lousy car, and the brakes were screeching. And I said, "Don't do that, he might get suspicious." When Tzvi hit the brakes, I thought that he could never be in my team because he's so nervous. Eichmann, he went on for 150 meters and he turned left. And another 50 minutes he turned left into the house. That was the only house anyway.
We watched the house of Eichmann for days.
They begin finding out exactly what Eichmann did, what time he woke up, when he left for work, what bus he took, how long he stayed at work, when he came home, what he did when he came home, when the lights finally went out at night.
A single word is telexed back to Mossad headquarters in Israel.
Carrot was the code word that tells you a lot of things. One, we found the man who's in the picture that we brought back. Second, the situation in the field there is possible to make a kidnap operation. Third, we are going to continue the surveillance of the house.
In Jerusalem, the Mossad boss gives the green light to Operation Eichmann. Capture the man who organized the genocide of Europe's Jews and bring him to Israel to stand trial for his crimes.
I was 14 when I left Czechoslovakia. We went to Hungary, and in 1944 we were taken to Auschwitz. All of us, my mother, my sister, my father, my grandfather, my aunt and me, together on the train. We were frightened, we were hungry, we were cold, we were humiliated. We were strictly brought to Auschwitz to be exterminated.
After decimating Poland's Jewish population, in 1944, Eichmann set about sending Hungary's 700,000 Jews to their death.
Ultimately, anybody who is a Hungarian Jew or has their roots in Hungary and is Jewish will have a relative, an ancestor, who was ultimately killed by Adolf Eichmann.
The doors opened, and the first thing before even seeing, we heard the German shepherd barking. And couldn't believe it, that here we were in this horrible, horrible place.
The Mossad chief knows that an extradition request for Adolf Eichmann to Argentina will likely fail. It would also send the Nazi into hiding.
The kidnap team arrives, but they've got lots of things to be getting on with. I mean, it's not just a case of just like hitting him over the head, putting him in a car, putting him in an airplane, let's go home, job done. You've got to work out, if we hold him, where are we going to hold him? So they've got to rent a house. Now, renting a house in 1960 in Argentina is not the easiest thing to just go around doing. There's a lot of things like that which one doesn't think about they had to try and achieve.
That task is given to Master of Disguise Yitzhak Nesher. Posing as a tenant, he finds a villa an hour's drive from Buenos Aires.
They picked this house because the neighbors were not too close. It had an enclosed backyard. It had several rooms big enough to keep all of these agents. It was a normal house in a quiet neighborhood in Buenos Aires. So that was the first factor. The second was they needed to get Eichmann out of the country.
It was Harold who came up with the idea that maybe they would fly Eichmann out with an El Al jet.
But Israel's national airline does not fly to Buenos Aires, with one extraordinary exception.
Luckily, and it's one of those bits of coincidence, there's the anniversary of Argentina's founding, and the Israelis say we want to send a delegation of dignitaries out to come and help celebrate. And Argentina says, yes, well, of course, you must send this special flight. And it's this special flight that's going to take Eichmann out of the country.
So the schedule of when the operation proceeded was based on when that plane was arriving and could take off from Buenos Aires.
The plane is set to arrive on May 12th and depart the next day. This means they have a week to kidnap the war criminal. The clock is ticking.
We saw him every day, the same time, except Sunday. Same bus, same hour, everything the same.
Eichmann is a character of habit. He likes to get off the bus, the 202 bus, at the same time every day, back from this big car factory where he's working.
The road near the house wasn't very busy. There were no people walking on it, and very few driving on it.
Garibaldi Street in 1960 was the worst street in the whole of the Southern Hemisphere to conduct a kidnap. It was completely exposed. The Eichmann house is just this concrete block. It's like putting a dice on a pool table. It's just there, and there's not much else around. So if you're walking along and you look different, you're going to be noticed straight away. It was a strange place to conduct a kidnap, but where else were they going to do it?
So we thought, that's it.
After watching him and his way of doing things, we were convinced that the easiest and the best way to get him was just when he gets out of the bus, walking home.
Now, orchestrating that to come off flawlessly is an entirely different game. The basics of the plan were, Eichmann gets off the bus on his way back from work at night. As soon as he turns the corner onto the smaller road leading to his house, they would grab him.
The plan was J. Malshin to walk between the house and the bus. Eichmann walked between the bus and the house, and they should meet somewhere in 2/3 of the way. Zvi Malshin had to tell him, Momentito, senor, I would like to ask you a question. That was the plan from the beginning.
To get the mechanism and the tactics together, we did it about 300-400 times.
They practiced throwing Eichmann into the car, putting him down on the floorboard, and driving off.
In 20 seconds, we wanted to do that.
They practiced the route that they would escape from numerous times in case the police were chasing them.
We didn't carry weapons because it was incriminating. Why do we need the weapons for? We don't want to shoot anybody.
We knew that the only enemy that we could face were the Argentine police or the Argentine military. So we said, we don't need any weapons.
And that's a risk we took.
The Mossad agents were running a terrible personal risk in going on this operation. If you were caught in Argentina in 1960 as a known foreign spy, you wouldn't have been executed, but you would have been in prison for ages and ages. And of course, your mission probably would have been denied back home, as is the great tradition of most spy stories. So yes, it was a terrible risk.
Since the war, Argentina has offered a safe haven to high-ranking Nazis like Eichmann.
There was a network that Juan Perón, the president of Argentina, put together to bring Nazis to Argentina. It was widely known within the network of underground former Nazis that if they found a way to Argentina, that the Argentinian government would help support them.
With the Allies' victory in 1945, Eichmann became a wanted man and went on the run.
He makes his way up to Hamburg and then ends up in a little town called Everson, where he works as a forester. Then forestry business goes bankrupt, and he finds this old Nazi guide to manage a chicken farm and ends up running what is quite a lucrative chicken business.
But in 1950, fearing capture, Nazi sympathizers in the Catholic Church helped to organize Eichmann's passage to South America from the port of Genoa under the name Ricardo Clement.
The route he's been using is a very well-trodden escape route. Some people call it a rat line. Eichmann's given all the paperwork he needs, such as landing permits for Argentina, exit permits from Italy, and so on and so forth. And eventually, Eichmann set sail with a third-class ticket to go to a new life in Argentina. Eichmann was certainly not the only senior Nazi to end up going to Argentina. There was almost a great tradition of Nazis going there. Some of them brought some money, some of them brought some technical expertise, and so on and so forth.
The former SS officer has a string of jobs, from running a laundry to raising rabbits. None are a success. He finally finds steady employment in a Mercedes-Benz car plant. While Argentina's military dictatorship welcomed Nazis like Eichmann, it would not take so kindly to a team of Israeli spies on its soil. To outwit the authorities, the agents forged several different license plates for their getaway vehicles.
We had 3 number plates, and we didn't have these revolving things that they have in James Bond films. We had to put one number plate upon the other. so we didn't lose time in taking off the previous one. That was really better than in movies, much quicker. For each license plate, we had different documents, just in case.
In Argentina, in the 50s, the cars you hired weren't the nice sedans we get today. They were pretty ramshackle. There's always a danger these cars would break down.
The cars were in a terrible condition, all of them. Once we had to push them.
Of course, anything could happen.
Operation Eichmann moves into high gear.
From the second Eichmann went underground after the war, he was constantly worried about being found. He was constantly worried about every footstep behind him was someone coming after him. They're constantly fearful that if they let the operation go just one more day, that day was the one that Eichmann would figure out he was being followed and he would vanish.
There was a danger that he would try to escape and get away from us. Of course, was a danger.
One way or the other, struggle or not, this was the moment to go.
We don't have any communication, not weapons. You could say it was a primitive operation, okay? But sometimes primitive operation works better than others.
May 11th, 1960. The kidnap of Adolf Eichmann is in play.
The Mossad agents arrived in the dark about 30 minutes before Eichmann was to return home from work to get their cars in place. They have two cars, one to capture him, the other to act not only as a backup car, but as an interference car in case they were being pursued by the police.
There are 4 agents in the front car, and they're the snatch squad. They're going to grab him. They get out the car, and they have the hood up, and they're tinkering. It's the classic tactic, isn't it, of keeping cover, is playing with your broken car. And they're waiting. Bus arrives, and they wait for Eichmann to come off the bus. And he's not there. And they just can't believe it.
The only night that he didn't arrive on the 7 o'clock bus was the night we intended to catch him.
People were, how could I say, quite tense.
Every night, Eichmann has been on the same bus. And the night of the kidnap, he's not. And they wait, and they wait, and there's no Eichmann. And after 20 minutes to half an hour, the group are getting very nervous.
Some bicycle went by and asked questions, and some men came by and asked questions. So the people became tensed. Tzvi Aharoni asked me, "What do you decide? Maybe we go." I said, "No, we stay."
And you've got to remember Garibaldi Street, this desolate, empty place, they're looking very, very obvious. And then, suddenly, another bus comes. And out of it is the unmistakable little 5'7" figure of the little man walking along. Adolf Eichmann. There can be no doubt about it.
We saw Eichmann coming, and then the operation started.
When he comes with his flashlight, I blind him with my headlights so he doesn't see the other car.
And he's walking towards them. And one of the agents, Malkin, the only Spanish he knows is the Spanish for a moment, or a little moment.
A momentito, senor. I would like to ask you a question.
You know, trying to get Eichmann over to come and see him. And he says this to Eichmann.
But Eichmann was frightened.
And Eichmann reaches into his pocket, and they think, he's got a gun.
And then Malchin jumped on him and took him by his neck instead of his mouth. He tried to hold his hand in his pocket, and therefore Eichmann was free to shout.
He started screaming, and I made a lot of noise with the engine to overshadow this noise.
And at that point, Malcolm grabs Eichmann, and they wrestle their way into this ditch.
We jumped on him, legs, belly, head. We put him into the car.
They tell him to shut up. And this is the first order that Eichmann has ever been given by a Jew.
Moshe Tavor immediately went to the front. Tzvi Aharoni was already inside the car with the engine running, and I and myself was in the back, his head on my knees, and we covered him with blanket. And then Tzvi Aharoni told him in German, "If your life dear to you, be quiet." And then he said,
"You should cooperate with our people, otherwise we're going to kill you." He said, Ich habe mich schon in mein Schicksal ergeben. That means I have surrendered to my fate.
Eichmann is in the car, I had to lead the way to the safe house.
No one said a word. My hand was on his mouth. He was completely quiet. After 1 mile, we stopped and we changed the plates of the car.
There were Argentinian number plates. We changed them to other Argentinian number plates, which were forged, so there was no suspicion on the cars. We had to change all that in seconds.
Garibaldi Street is a long way from the safe house. And don't forget, they're in a really, really bad Argentine 1960 hire car that can break down at any time. And if it's broken down and a policeman comes to help, it's all over.
We crossed checkpoint by military and police.
The police stopped me and he said nothing, and I said nothing.
They saw the foreign plates of the car and they said, "Go."
It's a nervous drive, but they make it back and they get into the safe house, and there they've got him.
We put covered glasses on his face so he couldn't see anyone and couldn't remember anyone.
We didn't speak one syllable, nothing. We didn't talk to him, he didn't talk to us.
We took off his clothes to make sure that he doesn't got any weapon or razor blade to kill himself.
He's given a medical by a doctor who was part of the team to confirm that his heart's okay. It's a very stressful thing to be kidnapped. One thing they have to do, they're 90% sure they've got Eichmann, but they're not 100% sure, and they've got to make sure they're not kidnapping the wrong guy.
Before we went to the Argentine, we studied the SS file that we had in our archive, and we knew Eichmann, his measurements, his facial scars, things like that. And all these helped us to identify him before we talked with him.
One of the agents of Aharoni was given the job of interrogating Eichmann in order to establish exactly who he was, what he'd been up to, and so on and so forth.
I asked him, "What's your name?" And he said, "Ricardo Clement." And is that your real true name? And he refused to answer them.
Tzvi is a very methodical interrogator. He can drive a person out of his mind when he asks you slowly the same question again and again.
Ricardo Clement. Was that always your name? What was your name before? He said Otto Henniger.
Otto Henniger, that was the name that he used in Germany after the war.
The agents know Eichmann's SS identification number. They find the scar where his telltale SS tattoo should be.
But Eichmann began to burn that off directly after the war ended, because he knew that it was the chief identifier.
Tzvi asked him, "Did you serve in the SS?" He said, "Yeah." And what was your SS number? He said the correct number of Eichmann. So you cannot say you're Otto Henninger when you know the correct number of Adolf Eichmann. He's not a genius. He made a mistake.
And Eichmann then knows that the game is up.
Within the space of 10 or 15 minutes, Eichmann admitted that he was Adolf Eichmann.
We were very happy, of course, that we got the right man, because until that moment we were not really sure. I asked him if he had any role in the Holocaust. How was he involved in it? And he denied, of course, everything. Denied everything.
You would have thought a monster like Eichmann would have a much more impressive physical presence, but it's just this sort of pathetic little man. Yet he was the one who had organised this enormous murder.
I hate trains. Then when I hear that sound, I'm immediately transported back to 1944 and the trip to Auschwitz. We had to jump off the train, and then we saw the soldier there, and we saw that people were standing on line, and one went to the left, one went to the right. We went to the right, and the elderly, they went immediately to the gas chambers. I didn't see my grandmother anymore. I never saw her actually leaving, mercifully. And they purposely always separated families. My aunt and me on one side, my sister and mother on the other, and it's the last time that I had seen them.
The mission has gone like clockwork until now. Argentine officials delay the special Israeli plane that will take Eichmann out of the country.
The team have a real problem now. They're stuck in this house with this figure of evil, thousands of miles away from home, with some very hot property. And that is not a good situation to be in.
The Mossad agents holding Adolf Eichmann have hit a serious problem.
They thought they were going to be there in the safe house for 2 or 3 days. In fact, the special El Al flight was going to be delayed by up to a week.
We knew that the flight would come to the Argentine something between 20 and 21st of May.
And there's not much they can do until their means of escape, this El Al jet, will be able to take them back across the Atlantic. They're stuck in the safe house. And like any people living close together under times of great stress, a lot of members of the team are, having goes at each other.
They were constantly worried in the safe house about people coming after them, whether the police or Eichmann's friends, and most importantly, his family.
His family are running around trying to find him with various friends of theirs sympathetic to the Nazis.
The risks were definitely the German community of Buenos Aires. The less happens, the more you get worried. Rafi, who was in charge, had most of the burden on him. He thought that it's impossible that the Nazis don't look for him or the family. He was really, really, really worried.
They've got this very tense time. And what's not helped is they don't want to let Eichmann out of their sight, or he might commit suicide or try and escape. These agents, and this is what's really unpleasant, they even have to help him go to the lavatory, and I mean help him do everything. It's quite something to clean someone off when you know that that man has murdered 6 million of your people.
It would have been much simpler to just kill Eichmann, but they needed to bring him back to trial.
All the people in the house, though some of them were Holocaust survivors, all of them knew the importance of bringing Eichmann alive to Israel. All of them. They knew it, they understood it, and they fully agreed with it.
The agents insist Eichmann sign a statement that he is returning to Israel of his own free will. If caught by Argentinian authorities, it might be the only thing that can save them.
Eichmann tried to get them saying, I'm a German citizen, I should be tried in Germany. But they told him, you're coming to Israel. And ultimately, they got him to sign it.
He gave me a letter signed by himself. I have the letter here. He said, I, Adolf Eichmann, the one who has signed this letter, I herewith declare ready to go to Israel in order to clear my conscience.
He said he understood what his fate will be, and he was facing his fate.
8 days after Eichmann was kidnapped, the specially chartered El Al plane finally lands in Buenos Aires. 24 hours later, the final and most dangerous phase of the mission begins.
The way of getting Eichmann out of the country on this El Al plane is spectacularly brilliant. They decide they're going to disguise Eichmann as a flight attendant.
We had a doctor with us who looked after him, and we gave him an injection.
And they're going to make out that he's drunk. They leave the safe house. They eventually arrive at the airport. They drive through the sort of special area where the crew are allowed to go. And there is this slightly comatose Eichmann.
They took him out and carried him on the stairs into the plane in uniform, and we waited to get the all clear for takeoff.
The diplomatic crew that had come to Argentina had disembarked. The only passenger going back to Israel, besides the crew and the Mossad, was Adolf Eichmann. They told the crew an hour before they were about to take off they were escorting Adolf Eichmann out of the country.
The agents travel under the guise of Israeli diplomats and off-duty El Al crew.
Even when they got Eichmann onto the plane and they sit him in a first-class seat, they still weren't home and dry. Argentine immigration authorities turn up onto the plane, as they're entitled to do. They want to check passports. And they walk up and down the plane, checking passports. And there's a passport for Eichmann in a fake name, clearly. What's wrong with him? Oh, he's drunk. Too much partying, you know what it's like Buenos Aires, you know, too much of kind of dances and girls. And of course the Argentine guy just thinks that's perfectly normal. This won't be the first drunken flight attendant he's seen. They get off, the steps are taken away from the plane.
They're prepared to take off. They're taxiing to the runway, when suddenly air traffic control says, stop. You can't go anywhere. Now you can imagine this moment where they have Eichmann, they're ready to go, and now what's wrong?
Moments before takeoff, the plane carrying Adolf Eichmann to Israel is grounded.
They said 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes, and 20 minutes. But we were suspicious of everything. We were also tense.
Have the authorities been alerted that Eichmann is on board? Is this operation about to unravel? Israel wants to take off and risk the prowess of the Argentinian Air Force. And an individual named Shaul, who's the navigator of the plane, says, I will go. I will check out and see what's wrong. So this normal navigator is told by Israel, if you're not back in 10 minutes, we're taking off without you. And he steps off the plane, his heart sinking into his shoes, thinking, I may never come back. It turns out that they had not filed something in the flight plan. The navigator gets back on the plane, then they take off.
Well, of course, it was a great relief and satisfaction. Then we finally took off and ran up in the air with Eichmann in the plane.
The pilot announces that the plane has left Argentinian airspace.
It was actually almost a celebration that they had accomplished this.
But they still weren't home and dry. Normally, in those days, you would fly north up to Brazil from Buenos Aires, refuel at Recife, make your way across the Atlantic to Dakar in Africa, where you would then refuel and head on to Israel. Now, of course, the Israelis did not want to stay in South America at all in case someone was onto them. So they had to try and get this plane across the Atlantic all the way to Dakar on a single tank of fuel. And it was touch and go. They're almost flying on vapor when they land.
When it was announced that Adolf Eichmann had been captured, the world was absolutely stunned. For the Israeli secret services to capture an individual 9,000 miles away and do it all secretly and quietly was extraordinary.
The Eichmann trial was, in many ways, more than iconic. It in fact put the Holocaust on the cultural map.
It reminded the world of what had happened in the Holocaust and launched this whole investigation of the Jewish experience during the war. Without the trial, people may have swept the Holocaust under the rug.
A lot of very, very powerful testimony was made during the trial of those who had either met Eichmann or survived the camps, and the extent and the savagery of what had happened was incredibly heartrending. Eichmann's defense was the tired, time-stained, boring, I was following orders defense. Eichmann's found guilty, which will come as no surprise, and he's going to be executed.
When I heard that Adolf Eichmann was finally captured and being brought to justice, I was, of course, very glad that finally he gets repaid for what he has done.
It was difficult to understand how such a man, who doesn't look like a big personality, was responsible for the death of millions of people. I don't know the answer.
The night before he's to be hanged, he writes letters to his family, and he declares how much he loves Germany, and everything I did, I just did for my fatherland. And he's then taken out of his cell, and he's hanged quickly, efficiently. He's then cremated straight away, and his ashes are put in a bucket, and the bucket's put on a boat, and the boat sails off the Israeli coast, out of Israeli waters. They don't want to be touched by the ashes of this man, and they tip the ashes into the water, and there are a few ashes left in the bucket, and they rinse them out. They want to get every last grain of Eichmann out, and they rinse out the bucket, and they go back home.
The end was just.
Barbie was rightly called the Butcher of Lyon.
Somebody who had committed awful crimes in France.
He's a murderer!
Klaus Barbie became the leader of a gang of torturers and killers.
He thought he was untouchable.
The Klausfelds are the most successful Nazi hunters of all.
I know that I endanger my life.
I was nervous very, very much.
You have to pay one day for the crimes you committed.
September 1971. German radical Beate Klausfeld leads a protest on the steps of a Munich court.
We were very angry. We had to do something.
She is outraged by the court's decision to drop the case against Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie.
If he would die unpunished, it would be a defeat of justice.
Barbie fled Europe after the war. But Beate and her husband Serge Klausfeld are prepared to hunt him down to the ends of the earth.
We decided one day to do something for justice, not for vengeance, but for justice.
Klaus Barbie, the former Gestapo chief in Lyon, has the blood of thousands of French Jews on his hands.
It was known that he was no more in Germany, that he was somewhere else in South America. The prosecutor in Munich, he said, you know, there's no way to pursue Barbie. We have not the proof. We hope that with the demonstration, the prosecutor would change his mind.
Beate encourages relatives of Barbie's victims to join the protest.
Madame Benguigui, who was mother of 3 boys who were arrested by Klaus Barbie. And she started a hunger strike. And Beate remained close to her and explained to the people what happened exactly.
There was an orphanage full of Jewish children in a little village called Isieux, not too far from Lyon. And one day in 1944, Barbie arranges for the entire orphanage to be cleared out. These are just very, very young children. They are sent to the transit camp at Drancy. And from there, they're dispatched to Auschwitz.
Madame Benguigui never saw her boys again.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait, ces enfants, pour les déporter et les envoyer au four?
Barbie, on April 7, 1944, signed a telex telling that the children orphanage was liquidated by the Gestapo and that 44 children were arrested and deported.
The case against Barbie has been dropped for lack of evidence. The prosecutor can't prove that Barbie knew he was sending the children to their deaths. But Beate claims to have incriminating new evidence.
And the German television arrived also, and when the general prosecutor saw that, he decided to have Beate and Madame Benguigui to come in his office.
And he said, Mrs. Klarsfeld, what do you want? I said, I had papers to prove the crimes Klaus Barbie committed.
She presents a report on a witness in Lyon who once heard Barbie say deported Jews would be killed.
So the general prosecutor told to Beate, find the direct witness who heard that, and I will reopen the case.
When Beate asks for the prosecutor's promise in writing, he says no. His secretary has gone home.
I said, you know, I will write your promise. He had a typewriter in his office, and I said, please tell me what I have to write, and I wrote it, and then he signed, and with this letter, I could go back to France.
Beate and her husband, Serge, have dedicated their lives to hunting down Nazi criminals.
They're an extraordinary couple. Serge is French, and his father had been taken away by the Gestapo for being Jewish and had died in the camps.
I decided that I did not survive for nothing.
Beate was German, she was a German student, and she met Serge literally on the metro.
In France, in Paris.
We met then 2 or 3 days later, and then he told me that he's Jewish and that his father has been deported and gassed in Auschwitz.
And Beate's father, during the war, had fought with the German army. And it took Serge to open her eyes and make her aware of quite how vile and repellent the Nazi regime had been.
When I heard the story of my husband, for me it was sure that I have to do something as a German. We were a young couple, married, not a lot of money. Arno was born, my son, Serge and I said, you know, we cannot say nothing. So we decided to act.
After a few months, I found the witness who was an attorney.
The lawyer tells Serge he met Klaus Barbie at Gestapo headquarters in Lyon. A group of Jewish prisoners were awaiting execution.
And that he intervened and he told to Klaus Barbie, please, I ask you not to kill them, deport them. Barbie replied, deported or shot, it's the same thing. So that was a subjective proof.
So with this arguments in hand, I went back to Munich, and the prosecutor reopened the case.
What Beata does is she reminds the authorities that the victims and the victims' families are still there. This is a current thing. It's only 25, 26 years on.
The prosecutor has been won over by the Klarsfels arguments. He hands Beata a recent photo of a group of businessmen in Bolivia. One man looks suspiciously like the butcher of Lyon.
Prosecutor said, you know, I give you this photo, you go back to France and you ask survivors to compare, to see this photo and to ask them if they think it's Klaus Barbie. It's opportunity for me to assume my responsibilities and to fight as a German in order to bring the butcher of their children to justice.
The Klarsfels hunt for Klaus Barbie has begun.
Beata brought the photo to the French police and asked, is it the same man as Klaus Barbie in 1943?
This was a very important moment.
Two photos, they analyzed, and they told non-officially that it is the same man.
Always in our work we had been motivated, sure, but it was with more sorrow and more, I would say, emotion if you think about the killing of the children, you know.
The Klarsfels learn more of Barbie's dark past.
Klaus Barbie went to pretty religious school where he flourished, and he thought that actually he might become a priest.
But at age 19, Barbie volunteered for the Nazi Party. He rose quickly through the ranks, from the Hitler Youth to the Gestapo. Holland, 1941. Now a lieutenant, Barbie helped round up the country's 140,000 Jews. He was rewarded with an Iron Cross before becoming head of the Gestapo in Lyon, France.
It was a crucial city, Lyon, at that time, a hotbed of a lot of French resistance activity. And the Gestapo, in order to counter this resistance, did so with the utmost brutality. And in Klaus Barbie, they had the perfect man to do it.
Klaus Barbie is well known as the Butcher of Lyon. He was known for the crimes he committed in France during the war.
He was essentially a butcher, and he did just see people as flesh that he could beat around, cut, abuse, inject, do what he liked with.
Beata's next move is to go public with the Barbie photos.
Beata made such a noise in Germany that the photo of Klaus Barbie appeared in all the German newspapers.
But the reaction they're hoping for doesn't come from Germany. It comes from halfway around the world. A phone call from Lima, Peru.
And a man living in Lima told us that he suspected this businessman whose name was Klaus Eichmann to be, in fact, Klaus Barbie.
He got a picture of Klaus Eichmann, and he sent this photo and saying, you know, this Eichmann, certainly Barbie, is living here in Lima.
And these photos were analyzed, and he was the same man. So we were sure that Barbie and Eichmann were the same.
There's no doubt for us, no doubt at all.
For Barbie, the road to Peru has been long and twisting. In 1944, with Allied forces closing in, he fled to Germany, desperate to evade capture by the French.
Barbie then just, gets rid of his uniform at the war's end, and he almost became a beggar, just sort of kind of tramping the roads with a load of other ne'er-do-wells.
He spent 2 years on the run. But then, with the emergence of the Cold War, Barbie's fortunes took a surprising turn.
After the war, he was hired by the Americans as an anti-communist agent.
They had known that he had this time in Lyon, which was brutal, but it was very much a case of kind of not wanting to know.
So he became an agent in the service of the American Secret Service, and he was working for the CIA afterwards.
At the beginning of the Cold War, the Americans, the British, the French needed men like Barbie to spy on the Soviets.
But by 1951, his value as a spy was in doubt.
His contacts are drying up. The Americans know that the information coming in is poor, yet at the same time, they don't want to hand him over to the French.
First thing Klaus Barbie is going to say, I've been working for the Americans. That would be deeply embarrassing.
So the Americans think, what are we going to do? We can't kill him. We can't give him to the French. We can't just let him lead a normal life. So we're going to have to help him escape.
They plugged into the escape network that was working for the rest of the Nazis, and they sent Barbie down that rat line.
They issue Barbie with a false name, false papers, and Barbie and his family managed to escape through to Genoa and then on a boat to Latin America.
Klaus Barbie probably looked at Bolivia because it was so off the beaten track. Not easy to get there then. And so I think Bolivia was seen as a place where, you could sort of disappear in the woodwork.
But even in Bolivia, the former Gestapo chief could not escape his past.
When he settled in La Paz in 1951, he would go to the German club, and he had difficulties with a few people. That's when they began to discover that he had tendencies towards National Socialism, and a few members didn't sympathize with him.
Now 1971, money-making schemes have brought him to Lima, Peru. The Klarsfeld's mission is to bring the Butcher of Lyon to trial in Europe.
It's not difficult to kill, but we don't want to kill. We want a trial.
It was important to bring him to justice because he had to pay for his crimes in front of an ordinary court.
She decides, right, I've got a young family, doesn't matter, I'm going to get on the plane. I'm not just going to sit in Paris and, issue press releases.
I'm going to Lima to ask on the spot the extradition of Klaus Barbie.
What started out as a fight for justice in Europe has become a chase across continents.
So she flies to Lima, and she arrives in the dead of night.
So I'm alone, I have no bodyguards, no secretary.
But nevertheless, she's a woman of immense energy. She decides that she's going to give, countless statements to the press.
It's a protection for me. The newspapers announced my arrival.
Peruvian authorities take action, but not against Beata. Hoping to avoid an international incident, they force Barbie to leave the country immediately.
That's when the Peruvian National Police escorted him to the border.
Lo entrega a policías bolivianos.
He fled to Bolivia as he was a Bolivian citizen.
Because there was no treaty of extradition between Bolivia and France, he came back to Bolivia.
Now, at this stage, many of us would have given up and thought, well, the chase is over, but no, Beata gets on a plane.
So I said, my place to fight is now La Paz, Bolivia.
I think there was part of him that was daring. It was like, catch me if you can, and it was defiant.
my aim was to make public who is this man they're hiding. I had a file about his past, and I delivered to the newspapers and also to the Minister of Justice, the Chief of the Police, in order to tell them Klaus Eichmann is Klaus Barbie, and you have to extradite him.
But in seeking to expose a mass murderer, she exposes herself to danger.
There was a dictator at that time in Bolivia, and the head of police very strong and very cruel. So Beata was arrested, released, arrested again.
I know that I endanger my life, but I'm not so much concentrated on this.
Beata is not detained long, but it is clear Barbie has friends in high places. Friends who've been watching his back since the first day he came to Bolivia in 1951.
He was protected by the Bolivians because when he entered the country, it was a dictatorship, and no doubt they had known about his activities in Germany and in France.
All the nasty things, horrendous things he did, served him well in Bolivia because he knew a lot about interrogation.
And he's using all his Gestapo experience to advise the dictatorships on how to deal with anybody who's against the regime.
So there were some really shady deals going on in the 60s and the 70s involving the military.
Barbie becomes an arms dealer, and he manages to do so by setting up his own little maritime business. It's called Transmaritima Boliviana. He uses it basically to launder money, sell arms.
He was accused of trafficking arms, but he was never proven.
At one point, he is given $10,000 to take some cargo by the Bolivian government, but he never bothers to do anything with the cargo and just pockets the money.
After 4 days in La Paz, Beata's campaign gained some traction.
Members of the Jewish community and many Bolivians were obviously very, very incensed about the fact that Bolivia was a home to a former Nazi.
The national press began making all sorts of conjectures, and it did bother him. He had been discovered.
But the government still refuses to extradite him.
The Bolivian government considers that Barbie, under the name of Eichmann, was really a Bolivian citizen.
Beata decides to continue her fight on home turf. On her way to Paris, she has a stopover in Lima, where government authorities are waiting.
She's in this police office. She says, "Why am I here?" And he goes, "Well, we're worried about your safety."
The Peruvian police inform Beata she's received death threats.
Having made such trouble and identifying Klaus Barbie, and he had friends in Lima.
Was a friend of Barbie, was an active pro-Nazi.
They threatened and saying, we will take vengeance on Mrs. Klarsfeld.
I was nervous very, very much.
She says, "Well, just give me a gun. I'm perfectly happy to go around, looking after myself."
I'm more afraid about not to fulfill my work than physical fear, Police protected me until my return to France.
She comes back home to the Paris apartment and finds that Serge has left it in a mess with the children. So as soon as she gets back, she goes straight back into the domestic role of washing their clothes, cleaning and cooking. So it's extraordinary to think this sort of middle-class Parisian housewife is also conducting this great fight for justice.
That fight will soon gain an unexpected ally. Klaus Barbie's past is about to catch up with him. Just 1 week after her media blitz, Beata's bold tactic appears to pay off. Bolivian authorities are pressured into taking action against Barbie.
He was arrested by the Bolivian security.
The excuse? Government officials claim Barbie has an unpaid debt of $4,000. Now desperate to raise cash, Barbie takes a huge gamble. He grants an interview to French TV for $2,000.
He speaks in German. I am not Klaus Barbie.
Ich bin nicht Barbie, wie ich schon gesagt habe. Ich bin Klaus Eichmann.
I have never tortured, and I don't know about Klaus Barbie. I hadn't been in Lyon. And at one moment he asked him a question in French.
Je ne sais pas. Vous avez la conscience tranquille.
He replied, you know, so was one element more to know that he is Klaus Barbie and he knows French and he had been in Lyon.
Barbie was utterly brutal. He would half drown the victims from freezing baths. At one point, he injected some acid into somebody's lungs. One of his favorite little techniques was to shoot people in such a way at the top of a flight of stairs that when he shot them in the back of their head, their dead body would do a perfect somersault. And he would pride himself on getting it just right. I mean, it was his craft, if you like.
One day after the Barbie interview airs, Serge Klarsfeld joins a noisy protest in front of the Bolivian embassy in Paris.
We had to fight with a great energy to the extreme end of their strength.
2 days later, the French president calls for Barbie's extradition.
The Bolivian government told that the reply will be given by the Supreme Court.
Determined to influence the court's decision, Beata starts planning a return trip to Bolivia.
We had to fight with a South American dictatorship.
Meanwhile, in La Paz, Barbie uses his interview fee to pay back part of his government debt, enough to buy his freedom. Two weeks later, Beata arrives, armed with a new strategy.
Beata went back to Bolivia with the mother of 3 children who were arrested in his year.
The only surviving brother of those children is Alexandra Hallenbrenner.
My mother didn't hesitate for a second. She said, "For the love of the children, I will go."
We had a poster saying, Bolivian population, I'm the mother of the children deported by Klaus Barbie. We ask you to send Klaus Barbie back to justice to France.
The government said to Beata, "If you speak to the press, we'll put you in prison."
Doing that in a military dictatorship takes a lot of guts, and especially in the 70s. You don't want to end up in a prison at that point in that country, but she did.
Bolivian authorities are desperate to shut her up, but realizing her arrest could lead to more media attention, they decide to let her go.
In the 3 weeks they were there, every day they were on the front page. On every newspaper, they were talking about Beata Klarsfeld and Mrs. Hallenbrenner.
On their last day in Bolivia, Beata makes her strongest stand yet.
They chained themselves to a bench until nighttime.
We have always to take spectacular actions because if not, the newspapers wouldn't speak about it. We gave them what they wanted.
The police came several times and ripped up the posters, and each time the Bolivians remade them.
These 2 very brave women chaining themselves to a bench. I mean, it was a very, very brave protest.
Beata enjoys a warm welcome home, but whether Klaus Barbie is any closer to justice is still in doubt.
Il n'y a pas de justice en Bolivie.
Le gouvernement tient avec lui. Peut-être le peuple me comprend. Pas le gouvernement. Non.
Months pass. Barbie remains free. the Bolivian Supreme Court still hasn't ruled on France's extradition request. Frustrated by the delay, the Klarsfelds hatch a daring and dangerous new plan. They are going to kidnap Klaus Barbie and smuggle him to France. Serge travels to Santiago, Chile.
We wanted justice.
He meets with a former revolutionary who once fought alongside Che Guevara.
Régis Debray decided to help us in kidnapping Klaus Barbie, first from Bolivia by car, crossing the border to go to Chile.
Debray tells Serge he knows just the right people for the job.
We arrived at the border of Chile and Bolivia, and we met Gustavo Sanchez Salazar, who is his friend from the army. He told us that an attempt of kidnapping is possible between La Paz and Cochabamba, because Barbie had a business in Cochabamba.
We had to pay the money to buy a car, and the car was needed in order to capture Klaus Barbie.
I gave the money, $5,000.
After weeks of planning, the kidnap plot is finally underway.
Our friend who took the money and bought the car had an accident with the car.
And so we had to abandon this plan.
It was impossible to make the attempt.
It is a stunning blow for the Klarsfelds. Barbie may never be tried for his crimes. Despite the setbacks, Serge and Beata never waver. Through the 70s, they remain determined to bring Klaus Barbie to trial.
It's very, very hard during 10 years to have the same strength and the same will.
Their life since then has just been one long, very, very hardly fought campaign against injustice.
It's a great responsibility when you start a fight, which is a fight known by the media, the public opinion, and so on.
August 1981. Klaus Barbie has new hunters on his trail. New York Times photographer Marissa Bell Schumacher and freelance reporter Peter McFerrin.
I began investigating the links between the Nazis, the paramilitary, the military, and cocaine traffickers.
Barbie is now living in Cochabamba, a city 400 kilometers southeast of La Paz. In recent years, he's made himself a key figure in the Bolivian underworld, aiding the cocaine barons who now control the government.
Klaus Barbie became the leader of a gang of torturers and killers working for the military dictatorship.
And they're called the fiancés of death. Barbie issues them with orders to go and do what they like and basically murder and pillage.
Capturing political opponents, torturing them and murdering them for a group of right-wing generals in Bolivia.
These were criminals. And Barbie worked with these criminals and opened doors for them.
He's like a pig in clover. He's made an honorary colonel, and he starts becoming in charge of suppressing resistance movements in Bolivia.
And it's even rumored that Klaus Barbie played a role in the capture and assassination of Che Guevara.
Marissa Bell Schumacher and I decided to go to Cochabamba to track down Klaus Barbie. I had a friend in Cochabamba who was a journalist who also worked at the local phone company. And he was able to identify the area that he was living in.
Peter
McFerrin began ringing the doorbell so he would come out, but he didn't feel like coming out.
We probably were standing in front of Klaus Barbie or Klaus Altmann's home for about half an hour. You know, we're knocking on the door, you know, hoping for him to come out.
Police are from New York Times.
He saw them through the window and realized they were journalists.
After a while, Klaus Barbie came to the window. And we told him we'd like to interview him. And it was a matter of seconds later that a couple vans pulled out and people came out with machine guns.
The military police arrived, detained them, and confiscated their photos.
It was a complete surprise, a shock for us. We were obviously terrified, especially because Maria Isabel Schumacher was expecting. And they took us to the military headquarters. But it just happened so fast. Before we realized that we were in the military barracks, they basically threatened to torture us, and they were obviously very threatening in their tone. And their big concern was, how were we able to track down Barbie? Who was our source? How did we find him? The worst part was the threatening to take our fingernails out. And then I think they soon realized that they made a big mistake arresting two people who were working on this story for the New York Times. So after a few hours we were let go. We got out on the first flight we could. And we went back to La Paz, and 2 or 3 days later, the New York Times published a front-page story about the Nazis, about the paramilitary, about the cocaine traffickers. And hours later, I received a series of death threats. I was advised by friends and family, you better get out of Bolivia very quickly. And I caught the next flight out to Puerto Rico.
Barbie didn't disappear from Bolivia because he did not believe that he will be arrested.
He thought he was untouchable. And he also made sure that he had relationships that allowed him to stay in Bolivia.
The fall of 1981 brings political upheaval to Bolivia. A pro-democracy movement forces out the country's authoritarian regime.
The president who took over was left of center, Hernan Siles Suazo, and it was clear that he was not going to allow Barbie to continue in Bolivia.
When times get liberal, things aren't so good for someone like Klaus Barbie. The Klausfelds realized that it might be possible to try and get either the French or the West Germans to extradite Barbie.
The fact that democracy returned to Bolivia was the beginning of his end.
Bolivia is no longer a safe haven for Klaus Barbie. Seizing the moment, Serge turns to the most powerful man in France, President Francois Mitterrand.
We convinced Mitterrand to support an operation to arrest Barbie and to send him back to France.
But to pull it off, they need help from the new democratic Bolivian government.
The Bolivians realize actually they've got something they can pick Barbie up on. He owes them $10,000 for not shipping these supplies that he was meant to have shipped. And he says, well, I'll pay you. And they go, well, pay us now. And he says, well, I don't have the money on me. He says, right, you're under arrest.
Klaus didn't have that kind of money. He had about $5,000.
So he gets sent to prison, and he can't quite believe this has happened. $10,000, not a lot of money, but will be very expensive for Barbie.
I spoke to the lawyer to find some way to solve that problem, but I couldn't. Finally, I had to ask for a loan.
Eventually the money's paid. The Bolivians then say, well, you've paid the money, but you owe us the interest. And he goes, well, we can't get the interest, it's the weekend. Well, too bad. If you can't get us the money, you're going to have to be kicked out of this country. Barbie knows that they're out to get him.
Now, Serge finds that the new Bolivian regime has some familiar faces.
Our friend Salazar, who had been in exile in Chile, came back in this new government.
Gustavo Sanchez Salazar, head of the Ministry of Security, canceled his Bolivian naturalization because he lied when he arrived on his Nazi past. Like that, he could be expelled from Bolivia.
And he thinks it's not a problem, because in some way, like Barbie always does, he'll wriggle out of it, or if he's brought to trial, he'll be able to convince the jury that he's innocent.
But Klaus Barbie's long exile in South America is at an end. Officers escort a decoy from the jail, while Barbie is quietly taken out a side entrance. He thinks he's going to Germany, where he assumes he'll get a sympathetic hearing.
He's taken to the airport. There's a Bolivian justice minister says to him, you know, what do you think of, you know, all the evil you've done? And Barbie's very non-committal. So he gets on this plane.
Pero sin embargo usted sabe que los pueblos de Europa y particularmente Francia no han olvidado.
Yo olvidé. Si ellos no han olvidado es otro asunto.
The plane lands, destination unknown for Barbie as yet. And the only voices he heard, they aren't German voices, they're French voices. And it's at that point he realizes that the game is up for him. He is in the land of his enemy now. It's not actually France, it's French Guyana, but it's French territory.
On the airport tarmac in Cayenne, Guyana, Klaus Barbie is officially charged with crimes against humanity.
No me puede dar un juicio, no se condena, no condena, eso no me corresponde.
The final leg of the journey takes Barbie to Lyon, France, scene of his atrocities 40 years before.
We were at home. They called us to tell that he is in the plane.
Tonight, Klaus Barbie was brought back to the French city where he earned the name the Butcher of Lyon. Under heavy guard, Barbie entered Montluc prison, the same prison where 40 years ago, the ex-Gestapo chief is said to have tortured and killed.
On television, we saw the arrival when Klaus Barbie entered the place where he had committed the crimes.
When he was deported to Lyon in 1983, my mother was happy beyond belief.
A police motorcade takes the ex-Gestapo officer to the court.
The Barbie trial is one of the key moments in French 20th century history.
Klaus Barbie faces multiple counts of crimes against humanity. Among the team of prosecutors is Serge Klarsfeld.
We believe that we will be convicted because he was guilty.
Barbie once told me they are always going to want to do something, but I'm in the hands of destiny, nothing more.
His attitude did not change. There was absolutely no remorse for what he'd done.
And never a sign of regret, never a word of regret, and no word of the victims, you know.
On July 4th, 1987, 16 years after the Klarsfelds began their hunt, Barbie is found guilty.
The former Gestapo chief showed no emotion as a sentence of life imprisonment was passed.
I was satisfied, but I wasn't filled with hatred or vengeance. It was an historic judgment, and that was the goal. For my mother, too.
Until then, never you saw somebody, a group of Jews bringing to justice Nazi criminals by trial.
I see them as evil hunters, and they were determined to track somebody down who had committed so much evil. And that's admirable.
It was important to see that this abject and awful and brutal Klaus Barbie in front of his judges was brought to justice. You have to pay one day for the crimes you committed.
I thought, I'm looking at a Nazi war criminal. This is incredible.
Priebke had been one of the most important Gestapo officers in Rome during the war.
From all reports, he had a certain brutality and efficiency about him.
This guy is right up there with Mengele, with Eichmann.
What I felt in front of that man, it was hate.
We were hoping that we could confront a couple of Nazis in a German town in the Andes.
I've interviewed a lot of people who have committed crimes, and they usually run when they see someone like me.
Argentina, For half a century, a haven for Nazi war criminals. Until now. In a historic move, the government opens its post-war archives to the world.
One day in early 1994, at a program Primetime Live, someone said, why don't we do the story of how Nazi war criminals came to Argentina after World War II?
The story will lead one of America's most celebrated television news teams to the scoop of a lifetime, to one of the last remaining high-ranking Nazis still at large, SS Captain Erich Priebke.
With the greater liberalization of the Argentine administration, the old junta days are gone. New files were emerging which suggested that a lot of Nazis had indeed fled to South America and Argentina.
The stories that had been coming out at the time were that the Argentine government had been hiding something. Then I thought, okay, well, can I go down there and find a Nazi who's still alive, perhaps?
ABC News producer Harry Phillips is assigned the story.
I went down to Buenos Aires to poke through archives. I spent hours and hours by myself going through files. And sure enough, I found a lot of Nazis who we knew had traveled to Argentina. Adolf Eichmann, Joseph Mengele. The next task was to determine who was still a war criminal whose name I didn't have, who might still be in the file. We knew from the Simon Wiesenthal Center that there was a man in Argentina. He called himself Juan Mahler, but we suspected very strongly that he was a Nazi named Reinhard Kops, who we knew was a Nazi because there were records of him. All I needed to do was confirm that Juan Mahler was Reinhard Kops. Thanks to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, we knew that Juan Mahler was in Bariloche, living in hiding deep in the Andes in this small German town.
The Simon Wiesenthal Center is a Jewish human rights organization. What neither they nor ABC know is that Reinhard Kops, a.k.a. Juan Mahler, will lead them to a much bigger fish, the number 2 man in Rome's Gestapo, Erich Priebke.
I worked with a woman in Buenos Aires named Dalila Herbst. I hired her as a translator and a fixer and to do research with me. And so we began asking questions.
Harry called me and asked me to go down to Bariloche to get in touch with a guy called Juan Mahler.
We knew that Kops was in Bariloche, and we also knew that Bariloche was a haven for German migrants. They built this German town in the Andes.
Bariloche is essentially an Austrian German alpine resort in Argentina. For many Germans and Austrians, Bariloche was a real home from home. The lakes were there, the mountains were there, the Germans were there, and a lot of them were Nazis.
Reinhard Kops and various other SS men settled in Bariloche. For these Austrian and German people, they felt like they were in Bavaria or in the Alps somewhere. They lived very openly. They went to the opera, they went to the cafes, they had their restaurants. For them, it was like a home away from home.
There were probably some covert toasts to Hitler's birthday there. I don't think it was an out-and-out sort of Fourth Reich, but I think certainly it was a place where a lot of former Nazis lived.
In Bariloche, I was quite afraid of asking who he was. I knew that he had a small hotel, and I called there and said if I could talk to Mr. Juan Mahler. And they said he rented this hotel to us, and they wouldn't give any sort of information. And then I began to try to see where I could get this guy. So I phoned his house, and a German woman told me, we don't know when he's coming back. So I said, well, this is going to be a hard work. I called Harry and said, we don't know when he's coming back.
After the war, Captain Reinhard Kops fled to Argentina, but not before helping thousands of his fellow Nazis escape the Allies.
Reinhard Kops was the spy. He was the man going around handing out landing permits to Argentina to his fellow Nazis. The rat line became the term used by the Nazis who were, running off the sinking ship of the Third Reich, seeking safety. The red line ran from Germany into either Austria or Switzerland, from there to Italy, where they boarded ships to come to South America.
From his office in Rome, Kops handled thousands of Nazis on the run. Before long, he orchestrated his own escape to Bariloche, Argentina.
So I'm in contact with Dalila a lot. She stayed in Bariloche while I had returned to the U.S. for a time. I remember asking Dalila to check names out all the time, with the local community and so forth.
I was on my own there and absolutely bored. So I went down and asked somebody at the hotel if they could give me a list of books just to read and know the story of Bariloche. And between those books were one called The Painter of the Argentine Switzerland.
Maybe the book, A Local History, can shed light on the Nazi fugitives who've made this area home.
I went to the most important bookstore in Bariloche. I asked the man and he said it disappeared. So I went to several bookstores that night and it was exactly the same answer. The next morning, it was a beautiful day. So I went down walking, and there was a little kiosk. And there it was. I couldn't believe that. And I found at the beginning the story of Kops. And 3 pages later, there was a story of a man called Erich Priebke. It was very shocking for me.
Priebke had been one of the most important Gestapo officers in Rome during the war.
From all reports, he was very, very good at hunting down enemies of the state in Italy. And he had a certain brutality and efficiency about him.
Priebke had wide contacts with the Italian fascist, network in Italy, with priests in the Catholic Church.
When the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, Erich Priebke went on the run.
So Priebke knew he had to leave Italy. There was an active network of priests who were working, helping Nazis escape. The system for acquiring false documents is already in place.
In 1948, following the same rat line as Reinhard Kops, Erich Priebke and his family escaped to Buenos Aires. For 50 years, he has eluded justice, but now a team of journalists has stumbled onto his trail.
Every day we're on the phone talking about names. And finally, Dalila said to me, I think you might be interested in a guy named Erich Priebke. And I said, is that name on our list? She said, no, that name's not on our list. But I found his name in a bookstore, and I don't know if it's true, but this thesis talks about him being involved in some massacre in Europe. At first, I was a little skeptical. But after the second or third conversation we had on this, I thought, you know what, this sounds really promising. But is the guy alive? She said, I don't know. And I said, well, find a phone book.
So I went and wanted to see if I could get his telephone number. And I just got, a directory.
And sure enough, I brought the phone book home because in the phone book, she found him under his own name.
It was his name, Erich Priebke, his address, and his phone number.
Erich Priebke, except he had made one change. Instead of the H at the end of Erich, he was listed as E-R-I-C-O, Enrico Priebke. It had to be the same guy.
So I called, and a German woman again got me on the phone and said, hold on a second. And when he came to the phone and said hello, I got afraid and hanged. I couldn't, react.
He was alive and perhaps even a war criminal living in hiding deep in the Andes in this small German town. It really was a heart-stopping moment.
The ABC News team now hopes to expose not one, but two Nazis.
Well, we knew we were going to do a large story.
We had to do a total workup of research on Erich Priebke just to see if indeed this man was a war criminal.
Now, Argentina had admitted a huge number of Nazis after World War II. The exact number no one knows to this date.
Producer Harry Phillips returns to Bariloche. To stay under the radar, his team needs a cover story.
Dalila Herbst came in as a small businesswoman from Buenos Aires who was interested in perhaps moving to Bariloche and looking at business prospects. I was obviously going to be an American or a Canadian tourist. That's the only thing I could do and pull off. And I went out as a guy who was in town to do some fly fishing.
They focus first on tracking down Reinhard Kops.
Ultimately, I want to prove that Juan Mahler is Reinhard Kops. So I went to his house, and I just kind of surveyed the area myself. I did not knock on the door. I wanted to just watch him, but I didn't see him. After a few days in Bariloche, it became apparent to me that I might not see Juan Mahler. He hadn't come out of his house if he was in there. He hadn't gone to his business. I didn't know for sure if he was in town.
Phillips worries Priebke may have left town as well. He digs deeper into his past.
We had to find out if the allegations against Priebke were true, so we had to do a lot of research about his past in Nazi Germany. We were shocked with the results. We discovered records that showed that he was part of one of the worst atrocities, perhaps the worst atrocity that occurred in the country of Italy during the war. I thought, oh my God, this guy is right up there with some of the worst Nazi war criminals.
By 1944, Priebke was the Gestapo's second in command in Rome.
As the war was going very much against the Germans, there was increasing partisan activity. And one day in the spring of '44, 33 German soldiers were blown up by a partisan bomb.
They decided to kill 10 Italians for every Nazi who died. So that's 330 compared with 33 of the Nazis who were killed.
They had 24 hours to find the required number of people. And the Gestapo turn up and take away 335 people to be executed.
They should have had 330. They got 335. They rounded up 5 more than they should have.
Some of them were Jewish, some of them were children, some of them were very old men.
Some of them were Julius Bicicchino's relatives.
When the German people came in the night, a truck stopped in front of this house of my grandparents. And we see, in this night, there were 18 persons, and they putting them away.
Her grandfather, his sons, and his sons' sons, 3 generations are arrested.
They were driven up to the Argentine caves.
Erich Priebke was the guy standing outside the caves, checking the names off one by one.
They were led into these caves by SS men with their hands tied behind their backs in groups of 5.
The killing began at 3:30 p.m.
These victims would be lined up, and the SS officer would shoot them with one shot in the back of the neck, and the 5 would fall forward.
They asked to kneel, putting the head down. He killed him, only one shot.
Can you imagine inside this dark pit, bodies piling up, the screams of men? It is horrible.
Then 5 more would come right behind them, and they will fall forward.
Priebke was there with his roster. However, he did more than that.
He was one of the first to set an example by killing 2 of the individuals who were killed in that massacre.
It was the most savage, vile reprisal.
And we had been working on this story for a couple of months now. We knew that we were at the point where we really had to get shooting. We were talking about Priebke and how we were going to pull this off. We were hoping that we could possibly confront a couple of Nazis in a German town in the Andes where war criminals had been living for 50 years. We want to see what he's doing today and to see what his life was like in hiding.
Delilah Herbst must trick the former Gestapo man into meeting her.
I have to go to my room and call him from my room, alone. I can't be with other people to call him.
Delilah Herbst concocted a story about herself being interested in opening up a delicatessen in Bariloche. By coincidence, he had apparently had some business like that.
And I told him that I had a friend who lived in Bariloche, and that my friend told me that he was a very intelligent businessman. I had to think about something nice to tell him.
So he agreed to meet with her.
On March 28, 1994, Delilah arrives at a cafe in Bariloche to meet the man they think is a Nazi war criminal.
And the goal was to check if Priebke was Erich Priebke.
We brought a cameraman down to Argentina, and we began to do surveillance of Priebke. We wanted to get as much video of this guy today as possible. We had a camera that was a full-size videotape camera, and it was something that could not be concealed very easily. We had to take a bit of a gamble and expose ourselves a little bit.
We were afraid that something might happen.
Posing as a businesswoman, an ABC News researcher waits for the man she believes to be a war criminal.
We found a location in downtown Bariloche, across the street from a restaurant where Delilah Herbst set up a meeting with Priebke.
I had to take a coffee alone with Priebke, and I had to check that Priebke was Priebke.
She was presenting herself as a possible investor in a business in Bariloche.
It was not easy because they told me where I had to sit and where he had to sit.
Our cameras were across the street. We were in a kind of a stairwell, and we were 1 floor above the street. I remember worrying that Priebke would see us.
He looked like the most sweet and nice grandfather with his blue eyes and innocent look. And I began talking about war, and then I said, you know, my grandfather was born in Berlin, and his face changed. Berlin, he said. I'm from Berlin. I said, what a coincidence. And then I asked him, did you have to kill somebody in the war? And he said, no, because I was an officer in the German embassy in Rome. My coffee cup, you know, it was, you know, just running the coffee all over the, what a moment. I am an Argentine Jew. What I felt in front of that man, it was hate. I wanted to run away from that place. But, you know, I had to stay because I was working.
I thought, I'm looking at a Nazi war criminal. This is incredible. This man's been living in hiding, a free man, for 50 years after murdering 335 innocent civilians in Rome.
When I wanted to say goodbye, I just wanted to shake hands, and I put my arm this way, and he dragged and gave me a kiss in my cheek, and he said goodbye. It was very shocking for me, very shocking for me.
We learned about his involvement with the local German school, where he lived, the precise times at which he would go places. Very important strategic information for us to have. And he actually made a point of saying, I am punctual. I come out of the school at 12 o'clock noon exactly and walk home for lunch. I called New York and I said, I don't want to sound too certain of myself at this point, but I think we've got a big fish here.
Harry Phillips, the producer, kept briefing me, of course, on his progress. And there came a time when he said, I think we're ready to go down to Argentina. And he laid out what he had.
And at that point, we kicked into motion a plan to have Sam Donaldson come from Washington to confront Erich Priebke.
The ABC team has failed to find Reinhard Kops. They decide to go ahead with the story anyway, hoping Erich Priebke won't get wind of them and vanish too.
I thought it was very important to bring Priebke to justice and to tell the story of this particular Nazi and what he did.
Sam Donaldson was the host of a weekend show in Washington. We really only had a couple of days during the week where we could have him in Bariloche or in Argentina at all, for that matter. So we had to get him to Bariloche on a private jet. It was one of those rarefied moments where I'm putting down an American Express card to spend $10,000 for a private jet to fly deep into the Andes. We were very hot for this story. We felt that we were really on the verge of getting something possibly very big.
So we came one evening to Bariloche. We stayed at some hotel in the outskirts of town.
We instructed the pilots of the aircraft to go undercover. I said, you guys disappear now for 24 hours. Come back and meet us here at 3 p.m. tomorrow. We should be all done by then, and we got to get Sam Donaldson out of here.
Harry Phillips had arranged for a van to take us to this hotel on a lake. We stayed there until the next morning when we started out to find the two Germans.
We were going to have 2 camera crews, at least 2 translators, myself and Sam Donaldson, descending on this quiet little town. All at once, people are going to be asking questions. Who are these people? Why are they here?
The cameras were in cases, so it wasn't as if we got off an airplane with our cameramen holding their cameras on their shoulders.
When we checked into the hotel, I instructed the crew to tell everybody that we were wealthy tourists. I had just been there fishing. I was now bringing my friends back.
We didn't go out on the town. We didn't say, let's go out on the town and meet a bunch of German citizens here in Argentina and have a beer with them.
We wanted to be safe because we were going to do something very provocative. But we also wanted to succeed in what we were doing. And so we had to talk very carefully about what our schedule was going to be. We knew that he would come out at noon from his school, and we knew that we had some hours before we would need to be there, so we dedicated the first few hours to surveillance and staking out Juan Mahler's house. Even though we hadn't seen him at all, we thought we'd better spend at least 3 or 4 hours with Sam just in case he arrives.
And the next morning, we set out first to find Juan Mahler.
It was a long shot. At 7 a.m., we were out on the street in front of Juan Mahler's house. We couldn't put a camera directly in front of the house without being real obvious. So we had cameras in vans. I'm bleary-eyed because I've been up most of the night. Delilah is exhausted. Sam Donaldson, fortunately, is fresh, and our camera crew is wired, ready for something to happen. I'm just about to say we might not get anything when suddenly the gate opens in front of his house. And out steps Juan Mahler.
It is the first time any of the ABC team has set eyes on the former SS officer.
And we found him, where we thought we could find him.
I knew it was him immediately, the first time I'd seen him. And I yelled out to everybody, "There he is, he's standing in the street."
All of a sudden, a taxi came.
He got in it and a taxi took off before we could do anything. So I yelled through the walkie-talkie, "Sam, he's coming your way."
And we went after his taxi.
I was terrified because I had lost sight of him. I was too far behind. We were in a panic. And fortunately, Sam was right behind him as they pulled up to a pharmacy.
And Donald said, when I say jump, all of you jump into the street.
Sam and his crew leaped out of a vehicle and approached Juan Mahler, who was exiting the pharmacy.
I was waiting on the sidewalk.
Senor Mahler, I'm Sam Donaldson of American Television, ABC News.
He introduced myself. He saw the cameras. He knew I was from American Television, and he knew that he was being videotaped.
He looked like a rat who'd been caught with the cameras on all sides.
But what do you know? What do you want?
Well, is your name Reinhard Kops?
Excuse me, but I have no time for such.
Sam was asking him, "Are you also Reinhard Kops?" And Juan Mahler said, "No, I am not."
So Harry Phillips took out a photo where you could see cops dressed up as a Nazi.
This is not a photostat of your membership in the Nazi Party.
No, never. I'd been a member of.
I kept pressing him on this, and I had his picture, and I had other identifying marks from him as Reinhard Kops, who looked like the same guy.
You are Reinhard Kops?
No.
No?
No. I was in 52. The German embassy here gave me the name.
The name of
Mahler.
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 And what was your name before Mahler?
Kops.
Kops. Your name was Kops.
Yeah. No, it's not. He was.
We got him to admit that he's Reinhard Kops. Second thing was, Sam now had to ask him, did you help Nazis leave Rome?
I pressed him on what he had done.
Have you ever heard of the rat line? Something called the rat line?
No.
And after a little bit of questioning, he admitted that too.
I know now that it was something like that, but in those times I did not know.
Now I guess he must have thought, I've got to deflect this interest in me. It was a real shock what he said next.
I was not in Yugoslavia, Albania, in the SS.
Ambushed on the street by ABC News, former SS officer Reinhard Kops is growing desperate.
There's a lot of people here still Nazi. A lot, I tell you.
Who are they?
He pulled me up the street as if to whisper to me. But I still had a microphone. I thought, wow, I don't know what he's going to say, but it's going to be very interesting.
And he whispered in Sam's ear.
His name is Priebke, P-R-E. Erich Priebke.
He was nervous. He wanted out of there. He wanted to deflect attention, and so he decided to give up Erich Priebke. It was priceless. We were giddy, is the best word to describe it.
It would be hours before they could confront Priebke at the German school. How quickly could word spread?
You know, you have to realize this Nazi community in Argentina was full of rivalries and hatred. There had already been the case of Adolf Eichmann, who was kidnapped in 1960. There was also lots of rumors that went around the Nazi community in Argentina that Eichmann had been betrayed by one of his fellow Nazis as well. So it's a community where everybody was very suspicious of each other, and they all lived in fear that they would be arrested or kidnapped.
Who knows if these individuals are vindictive, or whether they want to stop us, or whether they feel that, you know, that we have just gotten something that could cause Reinhard Kops to be arrested and thrown in jail. But we only had half of our work done, and we were now planning for the home run. Erich Priebke. He was our next person to go to.
The Argentine Caves massacre is an incredibly important fixture on the sort of Italian cultural, historical landscape.
To hide their crimes, the Nazis used explosives to seal off the caves and entomb their victims. It was only after Rome's liberation that the true horror of the massacre came to light.
The caves were opened later that year, and there's a lot of very gruesome photography taken and a lot of testimony from the archaeologists and scientists who were there who helped dig it up. It is totally emblematic of Nazi brutality.
In June 1944, the Allies entered Rome. Priebke fled north to the Italian Alps.
One day, there's a knock on the door, and the Americans have come to arrest him. They're rounding people up.
Priebke openly admitted to the Ardetine Caves massacre his participation.
He felt it was a legitimate act of war. Following orders, it was reprisal.
Priebke spent 18 months in a number of prisoner of war camps.
He decides, after a period of time, well, I'm going to escape. So, one night, he decides that the way to get out, the weakest part of this camp, is the wire. And so he manages to cut his way out the wire with 2 accomplices. Priebke knows that he can't just sort of stay on the run all the time. The best way to secure a happy future for himself and his family is to emigrate.
But Priebke's future is no longer secure. 4 hours after confronting Reinhard Kops, the ABC News team stakes out the school run by the former Gestapo captain.
Dalila had done great work telling us about his daily movements. His schedule was so set that you could set your clock to it.
We knew where he was. He was at the school, at the Primo Caprara school.
Erich Priebke was supposed to be there that morning, helping with school children, helping in the classroom.
Dalila was insistent he will come out of that building at exactly 12:01. He will be punctual. On 2 corners, we had a van with a camera in them. We had 4 walkie-talkies. We were all in communication. But for some reason, his car was parked outside the school. So now we knew that perhaps he would get into his car and drive somewhere, meaning that we would have a very small window of opportunity to catch him. We weren't ready for the fact that his car was parked outside the school. The tension is ratcheted up. And then at precisely 12:01, he steps out of the school. All the doors fly open and we converge on him, fearful that he's going to jump into his car and drive away.
I approached him. Again, I identified myself. American television.
Senor Priebke, Sam Donaldson of American television.
Sam is running across the street yelling, "Senor Priebke!" And I'm having a heart attack because I'm thinking, speak English, please. Don't invite him to speak a foreign language.
Sam Donaldson said, Erich Priebke, and he turned round and smiled.
Yes, Senor Priebke? Yes.
Can we talk to you about what you did during World War II? I had no idea what he would say.
Finally, ABC News anchor Sam Donaldson is face-to-face with fugitive Nazi war criminal Erich Priebke.
I've interviewed a lot of people who have committed crimes, and they usually run when they see someone like me.
He clearly is not intimidated by us in any way.
Made no sense. Here's a man that's committed terrible crimes. Why does he want to talk to a reporter?
You were in the Gestapo in 1944, were you not? In Rome?
Yes, in Rome, yes.
Yes, I am Erich Priebke. Yes, I was in Rome.
You know, the communists blow up a group of our German soldiers.
Yes.
For every German soldier, 10 Italians had to die.
He admitted to just about everything that he did.
But why did you shoot them? They had not done anything.
You know, that was our order.
Donaldson is a man who wouldn't leave you a second without asking things. He keeps asking and asking and asking.
But orders are not an excuse.
Oh, well, at this time, order was an order, you mean, you see?
And he was getting more and more agitated. He said, we didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it, but I had to.
You were just following orders?
Yes, of course, yes. But I didn't shot anybody.
He actually denied that he had shot anyone personally. But we had papers from a British prisoner of war camp where he had admitted shooting 2 people.
We had his confession.
You were there when they were shot, the civilians.
Yes, the first ones, yes, I saw them, yes.
And you carried it out?
I had to carry it out, yes.
And civilians died?
Civilians died, yes.
When Sam raised the idea that perhaps he was a war criminal, he was indignant.
You live in this time, but we did live in 1933. You understand that?
I asked him whether old men should pay for the crimes they commit when they're young.
You know, that was not a crime, that was a
Shooting
rebellion.
civilians in time of war is against all international
Yes,
conventions.
today, but not in this time.
I'm sure DeLillo was enraged.
I felt proud because I said, at least one. I got one.
Reporters are not supposed to be emotional on a story. We're trying to get the facts and all of this. But I did become emotional by this time.
How do you feel about the fact that 6 million Jews were executed, killed?
Yeah, no, I feel very sorry about it. Very, very sorry.
But you did it.
Many young men do things when they are old men like me now. They're very sorry about it.
And finally, I said to him, many people think you should be executed for your crimes. And at that point, you could see a bell ringing in his head. You know, is this a good idea, talking to this idiot?
You came over me, right? That's it. It's not a nice manner you did it. You are not a gentleman.
And he slams the door and drives away. It was a high like you only experience once in your career. We got on a phone, and the reaction from New York is, oh my God, this sounds amazing.
So I said to Harry, I think we better get out of town as quickly as we can. The worry that I had was that someone would realize that it would be advantageous to get hold of that videotape and not let it leave Bariloche. That was my worry.
ABC News have captured Nazi war criminals Reinhard Kops and Erich Priebke on tape. It is a huge story. They can't risk losing it.
We knew that we had to get Sam out of town. And so within 2 hours of the confrontation with Priebke, we called the pilots who were hiding in Bariloche. By the time Sam got there, they were just about ready to go, and he left very quickly. It's safe to say within 6 hours of that encounter, those tapes were airborne for the United States. It was better than the best luck I ever could imagine. This is one of those moments where you just say everything went absolutely right. We knew we had a great story. That's all we knew initially.
Good evening. Tonight, we're going to tell the story of how thousands of suspected Nazi war criminals escaped justice.
When we put this story in the air, what might happen to Erich Priebke was going to be the next story.
The broadcast airs 6 weeks after the 50th anniversary of the Ardeatine Cave Massacre.
The reaction in Argentina was an explosion of media. In Italy, the same thing happened because the Italians actually believed that all of the perpetrators of that massacre in Rome in 1944 were either dead or had been convicted.
Within days of the broadcast, Priebke is arrested.
Kops was hounded to the point where he vanished and fled the country, apparently went to Chile. And with Priebke in custody, the media went crazy with pictures and stories and full-page headlines.
It's perhaps the one story that I'm proudest of from the standpoint of making a difference that I think counts.
Italy demands that Priebke be sent back to Rome.
There was a 1.5-year tussle in the Argentine courts, but he finally was extradited to Italy to stand trial.
Giulia Spizzichino, who campaigned for his extradition, attends the trial.
He never looked at me, never, because I was always the first person who speak about him.
Priebke's brought to Rome, where he faces a military tribunal. The tribunal finds him guilty of doing what he did, but they have to set him free because he was acting under orders, that old excuse. Huge outrage that he's been set free. I mean, there's almost a riot outside the courtroom, and so he's immediately rearrested.
He appeals the verdict twice and is finally sentenced to life.
When you're over a certain age in Italy, you can't actually be sent to prison. He is now currently serving his sentence in an apartment in the center of Rome.
It made me very happy, and that was all.
I know it's difficult, but for me it's impossible to forgive, to forget.
It was a validation of the highest order, you know, to think that governments were taking action to prosecute this man based on our work.
Human nature has not yet come to the point, it seems to me, where we can all just say, forget it, these kind of atrocities will not occur again. But one way to try to prevent them is tell the story of how people who may have started out as ordinary human beings became murderers.